Good morning and welcome everybody to today's webinar. Today's our sixth webinar in relation to the MAC treatment standards learning system, and so I'm very excited to get to this milestone given that this is our sixth one. We're hoping to just get started now. We do ask that unless you're on as a speaker that you turn off your camera and your microphone. It just helps with the sharing of slides. So just to remind colleagues that we are recording today's session just for the purposes of our record keeping, and it will be available on YouTube afterwards for colleagues who want to perhaps share the video after today. Can I just do some welcome and introductions? Thank you all for joining us. As I said, today is our sixth webinar, and our webinar is mostly around the system's responses to drug trends. So we've got a range of expert speakers from Police Scotland, the recovery community and our allies in the voluntary sector, and also Public Health Scotland, to provide us with critical support and services in the implementation of the MAC standards work. So before we get started, let me just cover some housekeeping for the session. We do ask that you mute your microphone, switch off your camera. It does help the call quality, and I think if you're experiencing anything like the disruption on the internet that we have been doing over the last couple of days, then you'll appreciate the kind of critical importance of us protecting as much capacity to share your presentations as we can. We are going to use the chat function today, so please remember to use it and to engage with us and let us know how we're getting on and any particular points or issues that you want to pick up and raise. After each of our speakers today, we will have time to ask any questions or share comments or any thoughts that you might have. So please take that opportunity to ask the experts in the room in order for you to get the best out of your time today. After today, we will be able to share the slides and we'll give a write-up just of the event. And as I said to you earlier, the recording will be available and ready for colleagues. If you're experiencing any technical difficulties, either hearing us or seeing us or being able to observe any of the slides, please do let us know. And the email address is his.matt@nhs.scot, and we've got some staff who'll be able to pick up any technical issues in the background. Before we get started, it would be amiss of me not to recognise the complexity of this subject area, and I just want to give us a bit of a trigger warning. We do absolutely recognise that working in the subject area around drug and alcohol can be quite an emotive area, and it's very complex, and we recognise the trauma that people have experienced and may be triggered by the content today. Please look after yourselves. If for any reason you feel that you need to take a break from the content, please feel free to do so. The slides will be shared and there will be a recording later on. Please remember that the chat is a public space and it is available to anybody who goes on to it. So please don't share anything that's private in nature or feels a bit that you might expose any colleagues or vulnerable individuals. If you've got any other questions in relation to any of this content or anything that you want to raise with me direct, please email me at his.matt@nhs.scot instead of using the chat function. So before we get started, let me just give you a brief context. So today we've got a number of speakers that are going to take you through their view of the world and the role that they play in identifying and responding to long known and new trends in relation to substance misuse. So we're very lucky to have presentations from our colleagues in Police Scotland. So we've got Donna Mackay, who's an inspector in substance use prevention, and Elise Wilson, who leads the non-fatal overdose work in relation to Police Scotland. So they're going to share with you some data relating to drug trends and also what they've done in relation to a non-fatal overdose pathway across Dundee and Tayside. And there's some great insights and some interesting data that they're going to share with you today. As I said, there will be opportunities for you guys to ask any questions as an audience. Please use the chat for that. And if you've got any specific asks for any of the speakers, please let me know that in the chat so that I can make sure the right person answers it. Thereafter, our second speaker is Peter Cochrane, who's the Senior Recovery Development Worker at Recovery Scotland. He's going to give you a little bit more insight in terms of some of the work that Recovery Scotland do and their approach that they are taking to seek to support those who are using stimulants. And we're going to take a bit of a break, hopefully round about 10 to noon, all being well with times and stuff like that. When we come back after the break, we're going to hear from Elinor Dickie. Elinor is one of the organisational leads within the drugs team for Public Health Scotland, and she's going to cover some of the challenges and drug trends in relation to benzodiazepines, which I'm sure many of you will be very aware of. Thereafter, I'm hoping that we'll get a chance to ask Elinor any questions and pick up any specific things that have come up in the chat. After the presentations, we should hopefully finish around about 12:30, all being well with timing. I hope you can join us for the whole of the session. Please engage with us. At the end of the session, there will be an evaluation question that we'll ask you, and we ask that of each of our webinars. We use it for reflection purposes. But in addition to that, if there's any specific questions or any asks that you have, please do let us know. We had intended to do breakouts today, but because of the technical difficulties we're having in the office, we've decided not to go with that. So there is Miro boards prepared for people to capture their conversations or give us any feedback. So we will share them if anybody wants to go in and use them after the session today. So without further ado, and you've heard enough from me, I'm going to pass over to Donna and Elise. Can I just get you to turn your cameras on and your microphones, and I'll pass over to you guys. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you, Robin. Much appreciated. Thank you to everybody, and thank you for inviting us along to speak today. I'm Donna Mackay. I'm an inspector within Policing Together, within the Substance Harm Prevent department within Policing Together, and I've been joined today with by Sergeant Elise Wilson, who will take us through the non-fatal overdose pathway, which takes place within D Division. Can we move the slide on, please, Kyle? Thank you. In 2022, there was about 1,051 drugs misuse deaths registered in Scotland. That was registered by the National Records for Scotland, who are the main statistics body in relation to drugs deaths within Scotland. That was a decrease of 21%, which is 279 deaths compared to 2021. And it's been the lowest number of drugs misuse deaths since 2017. Despite this recent fall in drugs deaths, they are still more common than they were in 2000, and Scotland still has the highest number of drug deaths in Europe. There were 3.7 times as many drugs deaths in 2022 than in 2000. The highest rate of these drugs misuse deaths are amongst those aged 35 to 54. However, in 2022, all ranges saw a decrease in the number of deaths. In 2022, males were twice as likely to have a misuse drugs deaths than females. However, most of the decreases in deaths have been seen in males. If you look across the local authority areas, Glasgow City, closely followed by Dundee, has the highest drugs misuse deaths in Scotland, with Aberdeenshire and East Renfrewshire the lowest on mainland Scotland. At one point, Dundee Local Authority had the highest drugs misuse deaths in Scotland. Of all the drugs use deaths in 2022, 82% involved opioids or opiates, such as heroin, morphine, and methadone. 57% included benzodiazepines, such as diazepam and itazomal, and 35% included gabapentin and pregabalin, and 35% involved cocaine. While opiates and opioids remain the most commonly implicated drugs in drugs misuse deaths, benzodiazepines has seen an overall increase in use. Benzodiazepines are usually prescription medication, which are depressants that produce sedation and hypnosis, relieve anxiety, muscle spasms, and reduce seizures. Over the past few years, there's been an increase in the number of street benzodiazepines, and these were implicated in a vast majority of benzodiazepine deaths and are more commonly known as benzos. Polydrug use is the term that is the use of more than one drug type or type of drug at the same time or one after the other. In 79% of all drug misuse deaths, there was more than one drug found to be present in the body. And polydrug use also includes the use of alcohol, or if alcohol was found to be present in the body. The emerging trends in the use of illicit drugs is difficult to predict. However, like all economic markets, it's based on supply and demand. Any changes to the supply chain influences and impacts the availability and demand within the market. However, within an illicit market, it's harder to predict potential emerging trends to enable a proactive response rather than a reactive response. Whilst the statistics provided by the National Records for Scotland provide the official drug-related death figures, they are only able to provide an annual update as to potential trends in drug deaths. This can limit services' ability to target service and support service users at the point of criticality. In a bid to react quicker to any emerging trends, any emerging changes in drug trends, and to assist in reducing harm and saving lives, Police Scotland work in partnership with Public Health Scotland and their Rapid Action Drug Alert and Response process, more commonly known as RADAR. Can we move on to the next slide? Thank you. RADAR provides a structured way to collect, assess and communicate information about drugs, identifying risk quickly and informing rapid actions to reduce harm and save lives. Its aim is to reduce short, medium and long-term harms associated with drugs in Scotland and the Scottish population by identifying trends, risks and clusters of overdose and intoxication, responding to new and emerging substances, changing harms and other relevant scenarios. They advise on implementing immediate harm prevention and control measures, providing high quality current public health information and informing decisions about resource allocation, prevent service design and delivery. Police Scotland work with Public Health Scotland and RADAR in support of the provision of information and assisting harm prevention and messaging. The information provided to RADAR is completely anonymised. Police undertake this by notifying the RADAR team of pertinent details involving drug-related incidents which may pose a wider risk to the public. This information is in turn shared with the RADAR network. The RADAR network is a large group of individuals who have signed up to receive the alert. The group is open to the public, but most of the members are people who've worked within the drugs field, healthcare, third sector and drug services. A very kind of practical example of this would include a suspected drugs-related death, whereby circumstances have indicated that the person has died due to an adulterated bad batch of a specific drug type. These details would be identified via the substance harm prevention team through drug death monitoring and through early engagement with local policing as to the wider circumstances. These would all be collated and shared with RADAR at the earliest opportunity. Public Health Scotland RADAR have issued 3 alerts over the past year, one in relation to Benzodiazepine and 2 with regards to synthetic opioids, nitazines. Can we move to the next slide, please? Thank you. This is very much an example of an alert issued by Public Health Scotland RADAR, which is placed into the public domain. The benzodiazepine market in Scotland is changing, and Benzodiazepine is now the most common detected drug in street benzos. It produces a strong sedative and sleep-inducing effects, and as a result, there is a substantial risk of overdose. It can create someone to be agitated, confused, drowsy, lack of coordination, blackouts, and lack of consciousness. Benzodiazepine are sold as street benzos and can be missold as diazepam. And they are blue, white, circular pills or white, green and teal bars of either white, tan or brown coloured powder. Can we move to the next slide? Thank you. This is an alert published Drugs Forum in December 2023 to warn users of the use of illicit drugs, just to give you an indication about what kind of alerts can be put out there, not just by Public Health Scotland, but by the Scottish Drugs Forum as well. Can we move to the next one? There's been an increased availability in a new type of synthetic opioid known as nitazines. Due to their emergence in the drug supply market and their high potency, they pose a substantial risk to overdose, hospitalisation and death. Messaging from the Scottish Drugs Forum in relation to nitazines says they are significantly more potent than heroin. These are sold as counterfeit tablets and missold as other drugs such as oxycodone. However, it can be found as such as a powder and contained within other drugs. The latest data from RADAR early warning system led by Public Health Scotland show that nitazines have been detected in 25 deaths in Scotland since 2022, and that information is up until September 2023, and that's based on post-mortem toxicology testing. While nitazines are an opioid and naloxone should be administered to counteract any potential overdose, there can be a significant difference in the reaction to a naloxone administration to an overdose from nitazines than that of heroin. And it is acknowledged that more than one naloxone administration may be required to counteract the effects, and many more doses may be required. Can we move to the next slide? Thank you. In response to the high level of drugs death in Scotland from opioids and in support of a public health and approach to policing, in November 2020, the Leadership Board within Police Scotland approved a test of change on the carriage of naloxone for frontline police officers with 3 approved areas: Glasgow East, Dundee City and Forth Valley. After a successful test of change pilot and an independent academic review, the Scottish Government supported a move to roll out naloxone nationally to Police Scotland officers. On the 31st of August 2022, the national rollout of naloxone to frontline officers up to the rank of inspector began in both local and national policing divisions, and this included officers undertaking a training package. The national rollout was completed on the 31st of August last year, with over 12,400 officers completing the training package, which now enables them to carry naloxone. To date, including the test of change, naloxone has been administered 422 times by officers. All officers who administer naloxone are requested to obtain the details of the person. However, there is no legal requirement for them to be provided, and as you can imagine, there can be reluctance and scepticism for it to be handed over to officers. For officers whose details are provided, officers are requested to submit an internal referral known as an IVPD to our Cochrane hub. And this is the point in which I'm going to introduce and welcome Elise Wilson. She's been a founding member of the Non-Fatal Pathways process, which takes place in D Division, and she's going to talk you through its introduction, its current process, and its future developments. Over to you, Elise.
Thank you, Donna. Morning, everybody. I'm a sergeant up in Dundee, and I joined the department in 2019, at which point there was really an escalating picture around drugs death in Scotland, and particularly Dundee, who was hailed the drugs death capital of the UK, if not wider picture across Europe. On the back of that, there was subsequent a lot of focus, and the Dundee was subject to the Drugs Commission, who visited and developed a report identifying a number of areas where it was perceived that improvements could be made. As part of the work in hand with this, it was decided that they would develop a short life working group. And they took a cluster of non-fatal overdoses and a cluster of drugs deaths, and they were really what formed the foundations of the review processes. During that, it was quickly established that there was not really a consistent approach adopted for any person who had experienced a non-fatal overdose, but also about that relevance of a non-fatal overdose and the subsequent developments that could lead to a person being subject to a drugs death. It was established that the process was actually reliant on one person, with information only being available at that point from health, with information being provided from Scottish Ambulance Service. The information would be reviewed and it would be shared once a week with a member of health. And if that person was open at that point to the Drugs and Alcohol Service, then it would be shared with health. However, if they weren't, then the information wouldn't be shared and it would just be held nowhere, and nothing would be done in respect of that person. When they actually started to look at the pathway and individual experienced when they were subject to an event, it was established that there could be long delays in follow-ups, and in one case that was actually reviewed, that delay was actually 30 days before the person was spoken to, at which point you've missed your window of opportunity and the person can be dismissive about, it wasn't an overdose, or it wasn't really anything of significance. As a result of that ongoing work, a 6-week test of change was developed, and it was subsequently launched, developing a multi-agency professional approach to how we then looked at non-fatal overdoses. It was the realisation of the need for daily details, and it was highlighted at that point that police held a rich database of people who were subject to a non-fatal overdose. They were often first on the scene and often had that information available to them before ambulance were actually in receipt of that information. There was also about a realisation for the need of assertive outreach, an understanding of all the services involved and the ability for them to react. For example, statutory services such as the Dundee Drug and Alcohol Service, they maybe didn't have the scope to react on a day-to-day basis, but some of the first sector services may have had that scope to be able to do that. There's obviously concerns about GDPR at the initial launch of it, and through liaisons with information governance with respective agencies, there was that acceptance that we were sharing information because someone was at risk. and that not sharing the information could actually lead to the greater risk, which was what we'd seen through the drugs deaths and the escalating picture across Dundee. So going on to look at the process then. So the process is a Microsoft Teams meeting that happens on a daily basis. Now that call can last from 5 minutes to an hour, depending on how many cases are brought. A person's situation is brought to the meeting with a subsequent multidisciplinary meeting being held to identify the involvement with services and agreed actions. The aim of the group has been to respond to a non-fatal overdose within 72 hours, giving consideration to the services working Monday to Friday, the current demands placed on them. Then it was actually realised that through the use of third sector services, we could reach people on a day-to-day basis and sometimes on the same day as the person had been discussed. And that meant that we're actually meeting that aim of getting to somebody within a 72-hour period. Now, the reason it was 72 hours is because of the services working Monday to Friday, and the meeting's actually only being held on a daily, weekday basis of Monday to Friday every day, and weekends being where we would have that retrospective review of what needed to be followed up. Through this, we were able to deliver a consistent harm reduction advice and information, and also the provision of naloxone, and also the support and the training around that, not to just the individuals who'd maybe experienced the overdose, but also to the persons around them, whether it be associates or family members. Sadly, we have seen deaths in respect of people who have come through the group who have experienced a non-fatal overdose event. And that has obviously as well been not just people with repeat incidents, but where we've seen people who've maybe only experienced one incident. The key provider of data remained Police Scotland and Scottish Ambulance Service. However, we have actually now found that some services are sharing data on a day-to-day basis. They maybe have had somebody in their service, for example, criminal justice, who have experienced an overdose on that day and subsequently can be shared the next day at the group. With regards to repeat incidents, previously it had been thought or suggested that people who were losing their lives to substances were those who'd experienced multiple events. The group had recorded multiple people, and also the group had recorded multiple people who'd recorded repeat incidents, and it's about how then we maintained a holistic approach to each of those occasions and not just applying the same approach that was taken the last time. And through doing that, we were able to ensure that live interventions are applied and that they're practical and relevant, because again, it's about that person's situation may change. They may not connect well with one service, and there may be a need for them to be connected to another service. Through retaining that focus on repeat incidents that were coming through the group, we're finding that there was a longer spacing of time between people's repeat incidents, that we were able to apply different strategies for addressing what was happening to them in their lives. That included one-to-one support, it included residential rehab, it included referral to pain clinics, polypharmacy reviews, real focus on both medical and social provisions and the need of an individual and what we need to do to try and address some of the chaotic factors in their life. One of the other things that was important to highlight is that not everybody was referred for medical assisted treatment because they maybe didn't want to. There maybe was a choice for rationalisation work instead, and that was then maybe done through other third sector agencies. But what the difference was that connection back into the other services and retaining that connected approach to focusing on that person and the needs for them. And that also meant that the services then, if that position changed and somebody did want referred into medical treatment, then it would take away that wait time and they would be able to be connected with the services and put back into the service at a time that was suitable to them. Through the group, we have supported people back into treatment. We've increased awareness around naloxone and really changed the profile about how people react to a non-fatal overdose in and around Dundee and the Tayside area. We've also increased communication around drug trend development regarding what's circulating as suspected potencies, which again feeds into the drugs trend monitoring forum across Tayside and also subsequently into the radar alerts that Donna had referred to earlier. The key thing for us was about keeping partners connected, about focusing on that person-centred approach and sharing information across the care boundaries in the bid to help keep the needs of an individual. Again, other examples including that being food parcels, about getting people electricity, about making sure that housing support, and we've even had people who've been rehoused just due to situations that have become untenable and that has been affecting them in their substance use. So thinking about obviously the future developments, the pathway was first launched in 2019 in Dundee just in November, and it has continued to run to this day. It's about, again, how we maintain that front foot and don't just become stagnant. And the process has now been developed to encompass Perth and Kinross and Angus developing a consistent approach. We've now got a Teesside coordinator who has been recruited through health to assist in the development of the overall process, including improved communication networks. For example, the emergency department's GP services, where we potentially have an untapped source of non-fatals that could be happening. We've also got a non-fatal overdose pathway group that's been set up to review process developments and handle MAT Standards 3 reporting and compliance. And also we've got an ongoing review of the information sharing process to reflect developments relating to the non-fatal overdose pathway and the MAT 3 standards. And that's it. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you very much to both of you. That's a fascinating insight in how you've been able to take quite a wicked issue and get the collaboration across multiple stakeholders. I think that's remarkable. Can I just open it up to the audience then, just to ask people to raise their hand if they've got any specific questions that they would like to ask either of the two speakers this morning. Please do come in. Julie? Can you hear me okay,
Hello.
Julie? Hello,
Yeah,
please come in.
sorry, I was struggling to get my mic off there. That was really interesting, Elise, about the non-fatal overdose pathway. Thank you. It was really good to hear the involvement of family members and carers. And I was just wondering, how do you raise awareness of the pathway within local communities so that family members and carers are, aware of that for their loved one? And also, we know that people who use alcohol and drugs often experience stigma. So I was just wondering how it's been received locally and if there's been any learning about that so far. Thank you.
Yeah, it's been a real journey. Back when we launched it, there was obviously a little bit of that stigma of what is this, what is the focus around this, these are people who are making lifestyle choices, to now the realisation of that this is something that is really there to help people, that people have an addiction, and that there's ways and means that we can try and support them and help them. With regards to family members, we put a lot of focus on to the SFAD referrals, and we as the police, we go out now and we actually engage with families, and whether that be through bereavement support of people who have had a family member where they've been involved in a drugs death. But it's not just about that, because there's also the family members of people who have overdoses, and also the alcohol factor now, which is such a prevalent thing in polysubstance use. So through my team, we on a day-to-day basis have the access to the adult concerns reports that get recorded, and we will go through and we will pick out of those ones that we think will be able to go and engage with a family member and offer them referral to the service. We find that some family members maybe choose to just take the information, and then they may want to progress a referral themselves at some point when they feel it is appropriate. But we've also had an uptake on family members saying, this is something I didn't know about, and we really welcome this because we're struggling on how we can support someone. But also at a local level, that's obviously from a police perspective, we stay connected with the third sectors, and the third sectors have also put in funding bids for their own support services that they have got in place, again, for families who are struggling with substance use and supporting loved ones, as well as people who have been obviously affected through bereavement support. So we link in with them to make sure that we're not having duplication, because that's been the key things, is that we get too siloed as organisations, and we'll have our focus about, we'll do this because we're the police, or they'll do that because they're the statutory service. It's about how we speak to each other and say, like, who's going to do that? Well, we think we're the best place to do that, so we'll take lead, or no. And it's real that professional agency taking a lead and letting them be the one who goes away and delivers it, and then they come back and ask others for support if they require it. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Brilliant. Thank you, Elise.
Thanks very much. It's such a critical component of the contribution of family members. We've done that through their research and heard loud and clear that family members are really keen to be supportive of people who are trying to seek recovery, and oftentimes they're left out of any care planning for fear of sharing information and stuff. And some of the research that I've read in terms of recovery capital, it's a huge contributor to long-term recovery. So it's great to hear the contribution of family members in that. Thank you both very much for a very insightful presentation this morning, and we will be sharing your slides and things, but your information is available, I'm sure, if anybody wants to reach out to you. Thank you very much. So I'm going to ask Peter if you can open up your microphone, and I'm going to pass over to you. So Peter, you're the senior, I'm going to get this wrong, recovery development worker in Recovery Scotland, and you're going to share us a little bit about your approach to those seeking help in relation to stimulant use. So over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Ruth. Good morning, everybody. Thanks to Donna and Elise for your presentation. I am one of 3 senior development workers for Recovery Scotland. 2 seconds, I seem to have a technical issue and cannot see my slides. There we go, sorry. My partner says I get a lot of mileage at this pitch. It was for promotion a couple of years ago. Can we get the next slide, please? So I work for an organisation called Recovery Scotland. Recovery Scotland is a third sector organisation that was formed in Forth Valley in 1975, and we operate Forth Valley and North Lanarkshire recovery communities, and the kind of overall kind of mission is to support communities affected by addiction and mental health problems, although I like to reverse them because I generally think addiction comes as a result of mental health problems and not the other way around. Can we get next slide, please? So this is an overview of what we do in Recovery Scotland. So we operate, as I mentioned, Forth Valley Recovery Community, North Lanarkshire Recovery Community. We offer an assertive outreach service. We do digital lifelines. We do a lot of work through digital outreach using the Scottish Government's Digital Lifelines funding. We're also part of the kind of near-fatal overdose response team in Forth Valley. Operate the naloxone training programme within Forth Valley, and that's been really, really successful for a very unusual reason. And I was quite keen to focus that on people who surround people who use substances, because I was a service user of this organisation, and I was sat in kind of CADs and drug treatment services, and I remember my key worker giving me naloxone, and I thought, this is useless to me because I use drugs by myself, and I'm very unlikely to use it on myself. So with that in mind, I kind of started to focus the training on the people around, and I'm talking about organisations, businesses, kind of shopping centres, things of that nature, in order to kind of try and do 2 things: provide them with actually naloxone or Nixoid, but also have the conversation about why somebody might be in that situation in the first place, what will lead them to there, and kind of just improve the understanding that it's not such a black and white issue. We also offer kind of recovery and housing, so we have recovery workers seconded to Housing First. We get recovery worker seconded, 2 recovery workers seconded to the justice services, and this psychology substance use team who kind of work with people present with underlying substance use issues. They work through kind of graded exposure formulations, kind of, and the goal is to kind of obviously reintegrate them in a wider society. We also offer accredited college courses in Falkirk Stirling in partnership with Forth Valley College, and we also do, we actually don't do that anymore, I should have removed that from the slide, but we did do adult literacy classes. We offer other services as well. Could we get the next slide, please? So I'm here to talk to you today about kind of our approach, particularly through outreach, non-clinical interventions for stimulant addiction. And again, a lot of this is based off of kind of why people use drugs in the way that they do. And what I used cocaine regularly, daily, along with many other substances. And I came to understand why over time that was happening. So that was a kind of, and a lot of the people that we support and a lot of the people within our organisation are lived experience. So we very much, and I'm not saying this to kind of undermine other people's understanding, because that's not the case at all. It's just when you know what drives something, you kind of know how to take an approach to develop something to combat it. And that's, I use that insight to kind of develop some of the programmes that we have just based on that. But I'm very careful how I use it, because I never ever want to undermine anybody's trust in other services. It's a very dangerous approach to kind of be promoting lived experience as the only way, because it's not. It's part of a kind of co-management strategy that's very, very helpful. Can I get the next slide, please? So, I think it's really important to talk about this for quite a few reasons. This is we're going to look at the self-medication hypothesis approach for burning services, at least from our point of view. So it's a theory developed by Dr. Edward Kansian, who was a psychiatrist, and it suggests basically that individuals engaged in substance abuse or addictive behaviours are a way to self-medicate or alleviate underlying psychological or emotional distress. And before we go any further, I think it's really important to say that addiction issues, substance use issues, mental health are really, really normal responses to really, really abnormal circumstances. And I think that it's very important that we recognise that, because there seems to be this culture of it's an abnormality, and it's very much not the case. It's an adaptation, in my opinion. If you look at how the brain is wired, you look at different parts of the brain, you'll find that substance use is an adaptation, probably towards attachment. But we don't have time to talk about that as much as I would love to. And we see that many people who develop substance use disorders are diagnosed with mental disorders and vice versa. There's a kind of about 50% correlation of dual diagnosis. And the last point of the kind of self-medication hypothesis is that drugs are not randomly chosen, but they're kind of chosen because of what they relieve in a person. So opiates will relieve anger or rage, things of this nature. Stimulants offer a solution to depression, hypermania. They offer kind of a reward, essentially, for the kind of everyday living. They put a reward into normal things. Unfortunately, that kind of alters the production of dopamine in the brain quite drastically, and it kind of makes it difficult to treat, but it can be done. So it's, as I say, it's kind of about relieving psychological distress, temporary relief. The underlying issues are generally kind of people using to deal with problems such as unresolved trauma, low self-esteem, other mental health issues. I mean, I'm not covering any new ground here. This should be all fairly obvious to people. Substances are a coping mechanism, and if you ask anybody that's ever used a substance why they use a substance, they'll tell you it's because it does for them what they cannot do for themselves, which is to manage and regulate, sense of worth, mood, things of this nature. Can we get the next slide, please? And I think it's very important to speak about trauma and substance use. Again, it's nothing new, it's not new ground. I find sometimes, though, that it's an approach that's maybe a bit missing, or it's kind of not as focused on as it should be. I know there's a lot of kind of the Transforming Psychological Trauma training programs, and there's a big push, but I still don't see it delivered actively every day. So what do we know about trauma? Again, I believe that substance use is the response to trauma. You will never convince me that it's not a trauma response in some way. Exposure to traumatic experiences, as the slide says, especially childhood trauma, been linked to substance use, including abuse and dependence. Substance abuse is also highly comorbid with post-traumatic stress disorder. Early traumatic experience, it may increase risk of substance use because they tend to self-medicate, dampen mood, symptoms, association with dysregulated biological stress response. So back to the self-medication hypothesis, when we become overwhelmed. If you can't self-regulate, you'll turn to something else. And to kind of simplify that principle, when somebody's had a difficult day at work, there's probably many people on this call that will go home and have a glass of wine after a difficult day, or they'll go to the pub to socialise, or they'll turn to something to help them kind of cope with life. And people who use substances are no different. Traumatic experiences have lasting effects on individuals' mental health, may contribute to the development of substance abuse and dependence. It can lead to difficult and emotional regulation, as we've discussed. Some individuals may turn to substances or any kind of addictive behaviour as a way to cope or numb emotional pain associated with trauma. And I say any kind of behaviour, it could be gambling, it could be sex, it could be drinking, it could be shopping. There's a kind of variety of things. There's a lot of work on this. There's a lot of resources and a lot of studies done on the impacts of trauma and substance use. There's a lot to kind of unpick. But as I say, I believe that that is kind of what drives people's substance use. Can we get the next slide, please? So, one of the most kind of not widely talked about, or it's only recently become kind of a treatment method, is a community reinforcement approach. And the community reinforcement approach basically is what recovery communities are. They are therapeutic intervention for substance use disorders at a community level. It's based on the premise that environment and contingencies play a powerful role in encouraging substance use, and that basically means that things like environment, background will feed use. And so if you don't change the conditions in which somebody lives, be that through housing, their social networks, their finances, then there's a good chance that these things, when they're not addressed, will become maintenance factors that will drive substance use. So that's the premise of it. And we use kind of, as it says, social, recreational, familial and vocational reinforcers to assist in the recovery process. Because if we know anything about trauma, we know that relationships heal trauma. They help heal trauma. They help teach people that people are safe, they can learn new skills, they can survive in new environments, they can cope with difficult feelings. And the goal of the community reinforcement approach is to offer substance-free lifestyle that is more rewarding than the use of substances, which can be quite difficult. From my own experiences and the people I work with, I know that's difficult because when you use substances, you have a purpose. If you use substances, I used substances for decades, decades. I had an identity in that. At least I knew where I was. I did not know where I was anywhere else. So it can be very difficult. And this is the thing about selling recovery that's difficult to people. When you're trying to get people to engage in recovery, you're trying to sell them a concept they have no idea what it is because it's completely alien. They've never seen it. They don't know what it looks like. They don't know what they are giving up to get. And I remember that experience very, very well. So I generally kind of try to sell it as a discovery process. You use kind of behavioural activation stuff to think about, well, what did life used to like, or what would it look like if we stopped this? And we made some changes. This is the kind of thing that we try to do, because it's hard to just sell somebody the idea of recovery, especially if they're the first person in a long line of people who have suffered from generational trauma. And combined with joint contingency management is a very effective programme for addressing stimulant use and supporting individuals undergoing medication-assisted treatment as well. And unfortunately, despite, there's studies on this stuff going back to when it was first developed in the 1970s. It was Robert Myers and Dr. Robert Myers and Dr. Jane Ellen Smith who developed it. There's been a lot of studies on it, but it's only become widely used in recent years, and we've seen this kind of in the development of recovery communities. Can we get the next slide, please? I think services should make engagement with recovery communities a condition of their treatment. I know that might be a controversial opinion, but I truly believe that's how it should work. The same way that if you go to another healthcare professional for something else, they'll say, so a back problem, for example, you need to go to physio, you need to go see, who else, an orthopaedic surgeon. And you would not say, well, no, I'm not doing that, or I'm not doing this. And I think this is kind of what's missing in a lot of services, and it's a bit frustrating at times. So what we do is recovery cafes. We've got 4 in Falkirk, 3 in Stirling, 2 in Clackmannanshire area. My job covers all 3 local authorities. There's a big spread. We run drop-in hubs as well, and we also have recovery cafes 7 days a week across North Lanarkshire. Airdrie, Coatbridge, Motherwell, Wishaw, Glenboy, Cumbernauld and Kilsyth. They're open to anybody. They're open to families that are looking to support people. And the only thing that we ask on the day is that you just kind of present fairly, well, not asleep. We have drop-in hubs for people that obviously can't get there yet, but the whole point is to not make it accessible. It's to just make space for people. And I've worked with people who have rocked up to my drop-ins, absolutely tuned to the moon, and they've came back because I did not turn them away. Because I'd rather, if they were in that drop-in for 2 hours, at least they're in somewhere safe and you can kind of monitor them, as opposed to going, well, you can't be here. You can keep an eye on somebody there. Next slide, please. So additional community reinforcement-based approaches are kind of things where we teach people to build new social networks, new social skills, a lot of modelling behaviour. This is how I behave, this is how I've got to learn, because they've never seen this stuff before in their life. They maybe come from very difficult backgrounds, certainly my experience. And we offer, this is just an overview, I'm not going to talk about them all, but it's just basically based on getting people integrated again. Can we get the next slide, please? And that's just a picture of recovery cafes in action. I'm sure I'm in a picture there somewhere. Next slide. It should also include North Lanarkshire, I should say, but anyway. So this is kind of a bit of the elephant in the room when it comes to treatment, is what do we do with people who are presenting with cocaine and stimulant dependency? So what I decided to do was take essentially this in order to supplement the community reinforcement approach, and it's based on the the UCLA 4-point program for obsessive compulsive disorders, because there's a lot of kind of similarities in terms of obsessive compulsive behaviour when you're using substances, especially ones that offer a high level of reward like cocaine. Floods the brain with dopamine, as we know. But the problem is it kind of impacts the brain's ability to generate more dopamine. So you've got to use more and more cocaine. So we need to address the thinking and the compulsive aspect of cocaine use. And this is again based off my own experience of why I used it. And it's kind of basically offers psychoeducation. So the way we work it, so let me just get my place for a second here. So bottom side, compulsivity and obsessive compulsive disorders related to the feelings of limited voluntary control, being compelled to perform repetitious self-defeating behaviours. Now that was written about OCD, that could easily be written about using drugs because it's exactly the same principle. You've all seen the animation, or many you have probably, of the bird. I think it's a bird that's kind of eating these seeds. It's like an animation index, and it keeps going and keeps going and keeps going until it gets darker and darker and darker, and it falls flat. That is that in a nutshell. Can we get the next slide, please? So, 4-point program and how we adapted it. Psychoeducation. Individuals learn about the kind of contributing factors to substance abuse, its underlying mechanisms and how it manifests thoughts and behaviours. We also teach a lot about managing emotions such as distress tolerance, because people will use substances when they're overwhelmed and they can't manage big feelings. And we'll teach them anxiety management. I use a lot of stuff from a website called the Centre for Clinical Interventions in Australia. It was a resource that was shown to me, and it's got a lot of self-help stuff for people, and we work through this with people. We do exposure and response prevention. Now, we can't introduce people to substances as a way of trying to kind of get a graded exposure thing happening, but we can introduce them to kind of other anxiety-provoking stimuli, such as social situations, being out in the street, things of this nature, in order to kind of build up their confidence. Because if we know what we know about anxiety, and substance use is avoidance, it's experiential avoidance. And the more you avoid, the greater anxiety becomes, and the only way to kind of overcome anxiety is to basically face the thing that you are anxious until you become desensitized. That's how it works. So this is kind of what we try to do. We do cognitive restructuring, but just basically getting people to try and challenge the unhelpful thought patterns that are kind of getting them into the situations that they're into. Because unlike opiates, there does come sort of small periods of clarity when people are using stimulants. And that you've kind of got small windows to kind of try and get these concepts to them, and it takes a lot of time and a lot of relationship building. Relapse prevention, it's kind of focused on relapse prevention strategies to help individuals maintain their recovery. What triggers you? What can we do differently in a situation? Can we get the next slide, please? So to complement this as well, this is a lot kind of winding down. Brain lock is the method that we kind of use for working with people as well, and it was adapted from again a book by Dr. Jeffrey Swartz, Beverly Bennett, and it's CBT-based approach for obsessive compulsive behaviours. When applied to people present with stimulant dependency, it's effective in providing relief, and for many other compulsive self-harming thought patterns and behaviours. Can we get the next slide and we'll look at it, please? So brain lock is 4 principles: relabel, reattribute, refocus, and revalue. Relabel is about teaching people to teach people mindness, because you know, people who use substances, they can't self-regulate properly, they can't regulate their emotions, their sense of self-worth, their relationships, and self-care. So the point of this is to teach them some kind of mindfulness and some kind of awareness that they can notice their thinking in order to maybe do something different about it. So we relabel the thought as a symptom of an addictive behaviour, as opposed to the thoughts as an accurate portrayal of the person as a whole. They're not you, they are the result of this situation. Reattribute, we look at reattributing the thoughts to kind of maladaptive behaviour. It's a malfunctioning brain that has learned and developed in a very difficult environment, because what we know about brain development is 2/3 it happens outside of the womb. So it grows in response to the environment it finds itself in, and if that's a difficult environment, that brain will develop to accommodate and to work within that environment. So we need to kind of look at, this is what's happening as a result of that situation. It's malfunctioning circuits, essentially. Refocus, and the point here is not about getting people to avoid, it's about getting them to kind of shift their attention away from the obsessive thought and engage in something else that's more purposeful and a bit more constructive. We could go to a cafe, we could maybe go for a walk, we could do something that we enjoy, because one thing I had to do when I was kind of deciding to stop using drugs was to build more positive associations in my brain with those thinking patterns in order to make that other behaviour more rewarding. So it's about refocusing, and it helps break the cycle of obsessive compulsive thinking. And the last step is about revaluing. And this is important because people who engage in any kind of harmful behaviour will have the ability to minimise the consequences. Just ask any woman that's ever had children and kind of has a baby and goes, "Oh, that sounds like a great idea." You know, you can go, we need to learn to revalue things, and I'm not comparing babies to substances by any shape of by any stretch of the imagination, but it's about getting people to recognise what a substance brings into their life. What is it truly brought on? What's it done for your relationships? What's it done for your emotional impact? What's it done for your environment? What is it bringing to you that you really need? Because people who use substances will undervalue everything else that they overvalue the substance. And this, if you know anything about how the brain works, you'll understand how this concept works, but we need to try and retrain people to kind of evaluate that thought process and what happens. And sometimes it can be quite difficult. These are the kind of steps that we implement. I mean, there's many other things that we do as well, but these are kind of 4 key principles that I try and teach the team to work with people. And it can be quite challenging to get people to sit still long enough. There's sometimes underlying kind of other issues like ADHD, attentional difficulties. And I know there's been research done around kind of methylphenylhydrate and Ritalin is being used as a kind of medication-assisted treatment approach, but there's not enough research, and there's not enough at Scotland, to my knowledge, that shows that it's effective. So this is what we have to work with in the meantime. At least this is what we work with. So next slide will just be a conclusion of the presentation. Thanks for your time and thanks for listening.
Thank you very much, Peter. It's clear you're a very knowledgeable fella in this subject area, so your passion is tangible throughout your presentation, so thank you very much. Can I just ask the audience if they want to come in to raise their hands so that we can pose you any questions, if that's okay? Peter, you all right with that? Great, thank you very much. So I think one of our colleagues, Stevie Wishart's got a question. Stevie, can I just get you to open up your camera and your microphone, please?
Aye, no worries. Can you hear us all right?
Thank you. Yep, brilliant.
I think it's just looking at, obviously, Peter, you kind of quite rightly linked addiction and mental health, and I suppose for me, knowing that that's more prevalent or certainly more acute in people that use stimulants, are you seeing an increase in you having to support people to try and access mental health support? And if you are not getting that adequately for that group of people, how are you finding that hinders or helps your kind of programme? Does that make sense?
I know it makes sense, Stevie. It makes sense. And we see a lot of that. We see a lot of people who engage with or try to engage with services only to be told that they can't because they're using substances, despite there being clinical guidelines on tiered interventions for psychological interventions with substance use. They're there to find, they're just not followed, unfortunately. And obviously they go through, I think it's tier 1 to tier 4. And what that kind of does is two things: is it erodes people's confidence in services. It makes them feel, because they're kind of treated in isolation, that they'll never get help, and that it then drives it. So this is why I teach the team to kind of try and work with low-level clinical interventions, because they need to be that in the absence of actual clinical interventions, hence why we're using self-help from clinical intervention websites. People need access to this stuff, because I remember going to my key worker at a service I will not name and sitting talking about how bad his relationship was with his partner. And that was I used those services for years. I was on scripts for years, methadone, Suboxone, etc., etc. And there was not a lot of focus on what's actually driving this. Now, I'm only a few years out of service. It's not like I'm going back 15 years. I'm only going back to, just before the pandemic. So we're not speaking about, some prehistoric era. What we're seeing is, we'll motivational interview you, or we'll use CBT. CBT is brilliant if you can access the cognitive elements of your brain that allow you to challenge your thoughts. That does not work, however, if you do not have that capacity. So there kind of needs to be more about things that we should be seeing, teaching people ground themselves, how to manage stress, things of this nature. And this is kind of where, fortunately, third sector organisations will fill the gaps, because we can teach people these things. We can teach them how to establish a sense of safety. But it does kind of drive disengagement as well for people, unfortunately, because sometimes people will only change when they're ready to change, and some people will present to you and say, this is happening, and I don't know how to do something about it. And then you'll set up a plan for them and say, well, we'll do this, this and this, and then you never see them again. Because that's the thing about change, unfortunately, is an internal process. And if we're speaking about recovery and we're trying to get services to sell recovery, I think it's really important to look at the process of internal change, and that's what services need to do as well, if you're going to try and sell that to people. At least in my opinion.
Thank you very much. I think there's a lot of reflections in the chat. Hopefully, Peter, you can get a chance to look at them, because I think there's a lot of people appreciating your candour. So thank you very much for that. As ever, we always, time's always against us with these conversations, because there's so much to discuss and offer in and share as a peer group. I'm going to close this now for a break. Can I ask you to come back at 10 past? So that's, I think, roughly about 7 minutes, if that's okay. So we'll just keep the screen on. If you just want to turn off your camera and your microphones, go off and get a wee break, and then we'll regroup just at 10 past 12. Good afternoon, everybody. Hopefully you've had a chance to take a quick break. I'm just double checking our speaker. Elinor, are you back with us? Yes. Hello. Thank you. So
Hi,
guys, thank you. We've got 20 minutes till we hope to finish off. I just want to say a quick thank you to the previous speakers this morning. Fascinating insights, and so interesting to see the progress that's been made across the country in relation to the implementation of MAT and other supports for those in recovery or seeking recovery, as Peter was highlighting. So Elinor, can I just pass over to you? So for those of you who don't know Elinor, so Elinor's one of the leads within Public Health Scotland, and is going to take us through some of the harm reduction work in relation to benzodiazepine. So Elinor, over to you. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Ruth. Hi, everyone. So glad to be here. Great to hear everyone else's presentations today. And I'm going to outline update from the MAP programme in terms of the harm reduction work to support people experiencing harm from benzodiazepine use. I am the programme lead in the drugs team at Public Health Scotland, and we have 3 work streams across prevention, the surveillance work, which Donna outlined on radar, and treatment work, which supports the MAT standards, and the MIS team in Public Health Scotland, the MAT implementation support team. So I'm going to cover a little bit of background from the Drug Death Task Force and where we are. If we go to the next slide, please, just thinking about why we're taking a harm reduction approach. We have a historical pattern of use in Scotland, which is opioid and benzodiazepine related. So our prevalence estimates are based on those 2 drugs of use. And this was recognised in the Drug Death Task Force. And there was a dedicated working group that developed there on the screen as a snapshot of the guidance, which I will outline in a little bit more detail. So this was developed by an expert working group, as I say, which had clinicians, psychologists, and people with lived experience to really bring together a piece of national work. It is within the context of people who are on opioid substitution therapy, so people known to services is the scope of this guidance, and it's really a call to action for us to really tackle the harms that we see from benzodiazepines. We know that they are a threat to health and continue to be. In our last drug-related death statistics from 2022, which Donna also outlined, we know that more than half, so 50%, had a benzodiazepine implicated. And if we go to the next slide, please, this is a graph from that report published last year. And this is the deaths from benzodiazepines where they were implicated. Obviously, most deaths do have multiple drugs. And the top line, the solid line, is any benzodiazepine. The dotted line is street benzodiazepines. And then the solid line along the bottom is prescribable benzodiazepines. And you can see there the prescribable benzodiazepines have been largely stable for a number of years in terms of their role in drug deaths in Scotland. But street benzodiazepines, really, we've seen a spike since 2015. Largely attributable to Etizolam, and
Elinor, I don't know if
that is where we see there is a most concerning criminality in Scotland.
Elinor, I don't know if you can hear. Hi, Elinor. I don't know if you can hear me, but I think you're glitching. Do you want to turn off your camera and see if that helps protect?
Oh, sure. Sorry.
Thanks
for letting me know.
Thank you.
That's a nightmare. So hopefully I've covered the graph. It's really just demonstrating the harm that we're seeing from street benzodiazepines in Scotland and the need for a harm reduction approach, and really in particular considering both psychological support and a safe supply. If we go to the next slide, just wanted to revisit where we do see this continuing threat to health from adulterants and synthetics entering the drug supply. So we've touched on bromazepam and the nitazene's alert that Radar issued this year. Bromazepam is a synthetic benzodiazepine that is stronger than Etizolam, and nitazene is a synthetic opioid that is stronger than fentanyl, and we have seen both of these in the benzodiazepine supply in Scotland. So we've been working to work with the clinical directors to really recognise the clinical need and the demand for that support. And as I say, this guidance from the Drug Death Task Force within the MAP programme work was very clear about psychological support and prescribing support being the key to effective harm reduction. And that was real clear consensus from both the clinicians and the people with lived experience. So what I wanted to do, if we go to the next slide, is just detail what is in that guidance. So this is the breakdown. It makes up benzos, we thought, as a kind of memory aid, and really, as I say, is a call to action. So to be prepared to talk about benzodiazepines with people in services, to really raise the issue and recognise that it's all of our responsibilities to address this harm. To exercise emphatic listening, so really seeking to understand the context of someone's use, and within a therapeutic relationship, really explore how you can support that person. Ensuring a full holistic needs-based assessment, so thinking about that collaborative approach to the individual's reasons for benzodiazepine use, as well as the support that services can offer. Thinking about the zone of accepted risk between the clinician and the patient, so making sure the risk assessment is joint, and that the decision making around the risks, both direct and indirect, from both street benzodiazepine use and potentially a prescribing response, is really a shared decision making process. Ensuring that the harm reduction that you offer is psychological, psychosocial, and prescribing based. So we've heard from Peter just now about trauma and the reasons for people's, ensuring that we do understand that and offer that psychological as well as potentially prescribing support. And then a key element at the bottom, having shared goals, ensuring that we monitor and review this support with people on a regular basis. So that's the context of the existing guidance, which is available on the Public Health Scotland website. I can put a link in the chat just when I finish.
Elinor, I don't know if you can hear me. I think you're glitching towards the end of that final that slide there. I'm not sure if you can hear me. Can the audience just let me know by...
Move on to the next slide. Is what has informed work within the MAP programme. So the Big Act and the evidence base. So as the slide, please. Yeah, I'll try to change that. Sorry. Yeah.
Elinor, I don't know if you can hear me. I don't know if you can hear me, but we lost a bit of that. People are struggling to hear. I don't know if you could if we can get the slides in the chat, and maybe you can just talk through the final slides, if that's okay, as a workaround, because then we can certainly, because that reduces the but then we can follow along the slides if you want to do it that way, so we can put the slides in the chat.
There's only a couple more.
Sure.
It's really just to say that we're working to strengthen practice. We've mapped protocols that do exist across NHS boards, and we'll be looking at some tailored support and developing some case studies to illustrate the application of the guidance in practice. And I just really had wanted to touch on recognising the breadth of the challenges of this work. So it is really complex. The scale of harms brings some urgency to us, and then the threat from synthetics and potential changes in the drug supply really mean that we need a kind of long, sort of sustained, effective response. We recognise there is a limited evidence base, and we're really looking to how we can build consensus and build that evidence base. There is a lot of unmet need out there, which increases the risks. So really trying to support practice and applying guidelines that are there, recognising the need for a safe supply within a clinical sort of governance context, working with the clinical directors and the Royal Colleges, and then ensuring access to psychological support. And then my last slide was really just to sort of, in the context of those challenges, really just recognise that when we're thinking about steps to change, small changes do matter, and I guess we are taking quite a pragmatic approach. But I'll maybe wrap up there. I'm sorry, Ruth, if that's not come through, if my connection's really bad.
Not at all. We've had a similar issue in the office today, which is why we hadn't able to facilitate breakout sessions. So you have my compassion, Elinor. It's very difficult. I just wondered, there is a couple of colleagues who I know are particularly interested in community pharmacy, and I wondered if either of them wanted to come in, either Duncan or Adrian, just to pick up some of the latter points that you were making. Can I just check if Adrian or Duncan, if either of the two of you want to come in here? Adrian.
Hi, Ruth. It's probably a question for Duncan, since he'd be better placed than me to answer this. So, Elinor, you touched upon the need for research around there. So I was just wondering if we could get some more information on what's in place or currently planned to provide an evidence base for this as an intervention. But I'm also conscious that, given what Elinor talked about, the nitazines on the horizon, while what do we do to change practice without necessarily having to wait for the evidence that may potentially be a little way down the line?
Duncan, you happy to pick this up? Sorry to put you on the spot.
No, it's fine.
Yeah.
Adrian sent me a text earlier saying he was going to ask the question and drag me in. Right, okay. There was 2 pieces of work done last year. There was the Benzort trial, which was looking at benzo prescribing for patients on ORT. And there was also a feasibility study done, which was looking at a psychosocial intervention as well as prescribing for patients over 6 months. Both the feasibility study has progressed, and they are now looking at expanding it and looking for funding. I think Adrian's hit a big thing on the head there, is the timescales, how quick they can get done. And we know research takes time, and that's the application for the funding for the follow-on for the feasibility study is only just going in. So the results of that are going to be a couple of years potentially down the line. The Benzort, again, it showed it does work, it does help, but again, it's hard when we haven't got as much evidence for evidence-based practice. So it does take time, but maybe we just need to see what we can do to minimise harm for the patients that we've got.
Okay.
And especially with the nitazines and the synthetic opioids, not just coming in on their own, but coming in as contaminants to the benzo supply and to other substances is a concern.
Okay. Thank you very much, Duncan, and thank you, Adrian. Apologies, Elinor, that's a real shame. I think we got the majority of your presentation slides, though, just it was the final 2 that I think we struggled to sort of hear you around. Can I just take this opportunity with a couple of minutes to sort of go towards the end to thank you all very much to all of our speakers for taking time to prepare the slides and then present. I think in the weather that we're all battling at the moment, the fact that we got this far with as little technical hitch as we did is actually remarkable, because we were predicting a complete blackout this morning. Thank you very much for joining us today. For those of you that participated, as I said earlier on, our webinar is recorded. It will be available on YouTube, and we will be circulating the slides and a summary of our event, picking up any of the questions that were asked and also the chat. Can I also just ask you to remember that one of the things that we did over the festive period was we published a number of blogs and case studies. We'll put in the chat the web link for you to go and have a look at that. Please share them around your social networks yourself. They're fantastic in depth and content, and we've got a real range of people offering their insights and our subject matter expertise. We've also added additional resources that were produced by Elinor and our colleagues within the MIST team as part of Public Health Scotland, and that has supported the benchmarking process, as you will all be aware of, that's been happening in the system. We're going to add to the screen and a poll, if you don't mind just taking a couple of minutes just to answer that before you depart. It just helps us with our feedback loops and make sure that we design with the audience in mind the future sessions that we've got. Final thing for me is just to thank you all for your contributions and time. Please do connect with us on Twitter or X or at hashtag HISMAT for HISMAT. And you can contact us on email at his.mat@nhs.scot. Thank you so much to all of our speakers and the audience, because without which it's just you feel like you're just talking into the void. So thank you so much. And with that, we'll end our webinar there. So thank you all so much. Please take the time to complete the poll before you nip off. Thank you.